știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. самых окраин, южный гор до северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Весенний ветер веет, каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать.
и невостяк, в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, реют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 29th of July, 2025, and here we are with the, regular question and answer, plus a couple of other things as well. So the big thing today is going to be the question and answer that we'll get to in just a moment. But before we start anything else, we are going to ask you to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Also, be sure to subscribe on any platform that you're watching this on. So YouTube, Rumble, etc. Follow us on Twitter. So that's the promotional stuff out of the way. So we're going to start off with a couple of just short items, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So first thing to do is to mark a special occasion, which is that yesterday, the 28th of July, marked the birth date of the late great Venezuelan revolutionary leader Hugo Chavez, and it is of course over 12 years now since he unfortunately passed away far too soon. And there is a man who gave his life for the benefit of the masses and the nation. And that is something which very few people can actually say. Now, Chavez, of course, I would argue, whilst he was influenced by certain Marxist ideas, that is true, was not a Marxist, but was a socialist, a revolutionary nationalist, and a man who exemplifies the kind of leadership that one can only find in the oppressed nations at the moment, which is much like people such as Ibrahim Traore does now. In fact, Traore is very much an African, I would say, continua of Chavez's legacy. Now, Chavez personified this certain type of revolutionary leader, which, although I would say not specifically a Marxist, was very much a revolutionary socialist and a nationalist. And he was defined more than anything else by the unique relationship that he had with the Venezuelan masses. It was the Venezuelan masses, of course, that made him and propelled his project forward. And his relationship with them is quite fascinating and inspirational. It was, of course, in 2002 that the reactionaries in the comprador bourgeoisie in Venezuela moved against Chavez and moved to depose him. It was due to the extraordinary love that he was held in by the Venezuelan proletariat and peasantry that he was restored to power. But not only that, it was also due to the fact that he had a great deal of loyalty was inspired by him amongst the Venezuelan military, so that when Toledo, the wannabe coup president, all the way back in 2002, tried to take power, he found that not only was he faced with genuinely gigantic mass opposition in the streets of Caracas, but also that a huge chunk of the Venezuelan military remained loyal to Chavez. So it was this, but it was, I would argue, it was the relationship with the masses that saved Chavez's very life on that day, on those 24 hours. And if you get the chance to watch I think it's a documentary by an Irish television crew called "The Revolution Will Be Televised," which they were making. It was a documentary crew that were making a film about Chavez's presidency. Then they just happened to be there when the coup kicked off. So they caught the reactionaries and the reactionary military officers shepherding Chavez away. And then they were able to film the mass mobilizations in the streets and the fact that there was such a huge reaction to the attempted coup that it terrified the comprador bourgeoisie into surrendering. They found that they couldn't command the state forces or couldn't command all of them, and that they had mass opposition coming for them that was going to quite literally tear them limb from limb if they didn't give up. So that dynamic between Chavez and the Venezuelan masses was only strengthened by that attempted coup, and it was really that pushed the radicalization process in Venezuela that much further. You see the embedding of the Bolivarian revolution inside the working class sections of the Venezuelan towns and cities through the democratic mass neighborhood assemblies that exist, that are the bedrock of the Bolivarian revolution, a very real sense in which the mass and continual action of the Venezuelan working class propels the revolution forward through their participation in these localized democratic structures. But again, more than that, the Bolivarian revolution built from those local councils, shall we say, workers' councils. They built a defense mechanism for the revolution that was the mass and now armed mobilization of the working class, so that as well as purging the Venezuelan military of the disloyal pro-imperialist and comprador elements, so that when Juan Guaido tried to claim that he was president, literally nobody followed him at all. I think it was about 5 guys from the Venezuelan army turned up and they all got arrested. So Chavez successfully managed to, thus far, when he was president, purge the state forces of the comprador elements, but that's always backed up by the fact that Chavez and now Maduro, his successor, have the ability to mobilize the masses very quickly against any attempt to depose the Bolivarian revolutionary government. And it is that what Chavez gave to his successors was this ability to continually mobilize the Venezuelan working class and to understand that it was that would provide the defense of the revolution over and above everything else, not just in terms of the democratic workers' councils that exist in Venezuela, but also the politicization of the Venezuelan working class that continually goes on in those democratic workers' councils, and also the moving of that beyond the level of political and practical organizational work into military organizational work, into mobilizing for an armed defense of the revolution. And apparently, part of the inspiration for this came from Fidel Castro, of course, the great Cuban revolutionary leader who suggested this to Chavez. There was also some inspiration apparently taken from the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose I believe there was some credit given to General Soleimani, who also suggested that armed militias of the people would be something that would be a very solid guarantee against US imperialist intervention and coup plotting. Because if the revolution has its own armed masses on its side, then that evades the terrible criminal error that the Allende government made in the early 1970s in Chile, that of not mobilizing and not arming the masses for fear of a civil war that will be imposed upon you anyway. So Chavez learned from the mistakes of the likes of Allende. He mobilized, politicized, armed the masses, and it is them who keep the Bolivarian revolution safe. So on the day after, it turns out, his birth date, we salute the legacy of Hugo Chavez, great Venezuelan revolutionary leader, truly the successor to Simon Bolivar, and the father of the Bolivarian revolutionary process, which goes on to this day. Truly something which should be studied in much more depth than it is on the left in the Anglo-American world. Truly a revolutionary process that has to be properly understood, and the role of Chavez and his successor Maduro properly understood. Most of the clowns on the left don't want to do that, but here it is something that we will undertake to do. So you can expect more on the Bolivarian and Nicaraguan revolutions in the near future. So moving on then, and just moving into the always popular Ukraine segment of the show. Just take some coffee here. The latest from the front lines in Ukraine show that the Russians are making pushes everywhere, all across the front line, but especially in the Donetsk area. If you go on to the deep state map, which is the one I'm using at the moment, you can see that all the way along the front line, you can see small pushes forward, particularly in the Donetsk area, but also further up towards Liman, towards Borova, towards Kupiansk, and even up towards the northern end of the front line. There are small advances going on constantly by the Russians. So that if you look down the front line now, you can see greater and greater cauldrons being formed, I would say, is the correct way of putting it. So you have greater and greater indentations by the Russians behind the Ukrainian front line, slowly cutting off more and more Ukrainian troops, or threatening to cut off more and more Ukrainian troops. So you can see down, if you follow the frontline map and go to, for instance, Toretsk. In fact, what I'll do is I will just try to share the screen here and see if this actually works. Yeah, there we go. So if you can see here, you can see what the Russians are doing. We're going to use this as an example here. You can see that they're coming up from Toretsk down here. You can see the red arrows there are the Russian advances forward. And due to their position up here, they are coming in from the top right there around Chasov Yar, and they're coming in from the bottom left angle there, making essentially, you see the free sides of an enclosure of an awful lot of Ukrainian troops around this area here. Ultimately, they're closing in towards this town Konstantinovka, and that's in the Donbass area there, in the Donetsk region in particular. Should be noted, of course, that the almost 99.9% at least of the Lugansk People's Republic is already liberated. If we go down here, there's a lot of talk around action around Pokrovsk at the moment. And this is, again, obviously a Russian target. And you can see the same thing going on. You can see there is a big chunk there that the Russians are looking to surround, with movements towards Rodinsky, Krasny Liman, etc. on that side, on the top right side there. And from the bottom left there, they're pushing towards Pokrovsk. And again, that will trap thousands and thousands of Ukrainian troops, I should more accurately call them NATO troops, inside this pocket here. Ultimately, the center of it there is Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. So we can also see similar process just further down the way here. Russians slowly building themselves another pocket that they will ultimately crush, just further down the front line from Pokrovsk. And this is, we zoom out here, we can see that slowly but surely the Russians are building up to the point where they will be able to completely take over all of the areas of east, what was once eastern Ukraine, that rebelled against the fascist coup in 2014. Ultimately, the Russians are pushing towards taking all of this. Now, if you look down, just to complete the geographical tour here at the moment, if we look down here, the distances around Kherson, Nikolaev, Odessa, and ultimately, of course, over towards the contested Moldovan region, Prednestrovia. And you can see here that the Russians are actually, nominally at least, controlling territory. It stretches quite a long way towards their ultimate targets. So we're going to talk about their ultimate targets in just a moment, which of course include Odessa. And again, we will turn to the question of the likely outcomes of the war. But what has been going on over the last few days, just pardon me a moment, I'll take some more coffee. What has been going on over the last few days, that Trump has been, unfortunately, in Scotland, and that led to all manner of the usual hysteria. I've never seen cops from as fast, the farthest, most southerly reaches of England travel so far to do policing in Glasgow before. But there you go. All because Trump was here, and some a handful of fascist guys turned up to nominally support him. But Trump met with Starmer. Starmer usually wearing his usual look of a constipated eunuch in a girdle. Trump wearing his usual look of a man who's about to drop dead. And that's the inspiring leadership of the Anglo-American empire these days. Hope you're enjoying it, empire enthusiasts. But to go back to the point, the threats made by Trump to about how that now there's going to have to be a 10 or 12-day deadline around stopping the war, and if Putin doesn't listen, then the consequences will follow. Quite what those consequences are, nobody knows. But a lot of talk from the fanatics in the U.S. Congress and the phalanx of ex-military officers who always go through the revolving door of Fox News and CNN. But what does all this mean? Why is Trump banging on about a 10-day or a 12-day deadline? It's because the Russians didn't respond at all to his useless and lame threats of a 50-day deadline. Because if we go back to the map, why would they? What is it that Trump can actually threaten here with regard to the Russians? Biden had already tried everything that the US could feasibly do. The Europeans are out of military equipment themselves. Friedrich Merz is engaged in a lot of wild fantasies about what the Germans could do, but so far little has actually emerged. So what's the 10-day deadline? Again, this is another attempt by Trump to try and basically get the Russians to agree to a variation of what is called the Kellogg Plan. That is essentially what Trump is after. The first thing they want is for the Russians to agree to essentially end the fighting with no agreement in place. That's what Trump's after. Same thing Biden would have been after. Russians won't do it. As you can see from the map, not only are they advancing all the way or around a significant proportion of the front line, but they are causing more and more Ukrainian casualties and suffering less and less of their own. So why on earth would you agree to stop or to a ceasefire without any conditions being met? It doesn't make any fucking sense. So this is Trump essentially realizing that nothing he's saying is making any difference whatsoever. He rings Putin. Putin is very polite and says, "Oh yes, Mr. President, of course, Mr. President. These are our concerns, though." Trump goes away and thinks for a second and thinks, "Oh my God, he didn't listen to me at all. He didn't give up anything." And so he's trying a 10-day deadline. And this is also to draw upon the question that's already been asked in the chat. This is why we're getting the talk about Kaliningrad again. This is all part of the same thing. Now, Kaliningrad, if you're not familiar with it, and let me just zoom out here. You can see here on the deep state map, Kaliningrad Oblast. For those who are unaware of what Kaliningrad is the former East Prussian city, an area of Königsberg. It was conquered by the forces of the Red Army in 1945 and was held as a special region of the Soviet Union under direct control from Moscow ever since. It's surrounded, of course, by the pathetic, tattered remnants of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Excuse me just for a moment. And when the Soviet Union was destroyed by the reactionary coup and counter-revolution led by Gorbachev and Yeltsin, the Kaliningrad Oblast remained part of the Russian Federation because it had been ruled directly from Moscow and wasn't integrated into any of the Baltic states that surrounded it or Poland. So, and this was basically an arrangement which nobody really questioned until fairly recently. Now you've had all kinds of threats made by NATO senior officers about, well, we could take Kaliningrad, or we could do this, or we could do that. Usually made at NATO conferences or off-the-record briefings. Sometimes some US general gets over enthusiastic and talks about how easy it would be to surround it or put pressure on it. Now, the Russians, of course, consider this to be an integral part of the Russian Federation, and any attack on it would be an attack treated as an existential threat to the Russian Federation. It's Russian territory established under various international treaties that were signed after the counter-revolution that destroyed the Soviet Union. It is considered to be as much Russia as Moscow itself. So if NATO tried to do some invasion of the Kaliningrad Oblast, as it is labeled there, it would result in a massive Russian retaliation. And also Russia would probably try, maybe, I'm no expert in this, moving through Belarus to relieve the pressure on Kaliningrad by plowing through the Baltic states. And it would probably spell the end of the Baltic states, because I'm damn certain that it wouldn't be the Americans themselves who do the dirty work on any assault on Kaliningrad. But it's a joke anyway of a threat, because an assault on Kaliningrad, I'm almost certain, isn't going to happen. It's not going to happen, first of all, because the US won't risk their own men. The US generals who are based in Europe, who seem to be a bunch of blathering incompetents whose large stack of medals pinned to their man boobs seems to have been accumulated mainly through bombing Afghan peasants over the last 20 years, big brave men that they are. And so they might like to fantasize about taking Kaliningrad. But of course, they have neglected the actual reality, which is that Russia not only takes that very seriously, but also have contingencies in place for just that eventuality. And the US High Command and the politicians certainly won't want to be risking their own men on such an endeavor. If it did go ahead, they would try and get a combination of the Poles, the Baltic states, and the various other Eastern European countries, maybe with some support from the Germans, but I don't think they'd even get that, to be the ones doing the work on the ground, and they get destroyed really quickly. Everybody knows that. So why is it that these wacko US military officers are mouthing off about these things at the moment? They're mouthing off about them because they think that this is a way of exerting pressure on the Russians in these negotiations in Istanbul, which are going absolutely nowhere, and in which the Russians are making no concessions. So this is an attempt by these deadheads to try and scare the Russians into submission by saying, "Oh, we could take Kaliningrad." But as Malenkaya Rus, I think that's your name. If I have mispronounced it, I do beg your forgiveness. Says in the chat, Kaliningrad is one big ass military base anyway. They got a lot. The Russians got a lot of troops there, a lot of naval assets and air force assets as well. So it wouldn't be the easy job that these deadhead US generals thought it was going to be, particularly not if they're going to try and use Poles, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, maybe Romanians, or whatever other motley crew they can dig up. Maybe Keir Starmer could be persuaded to let 5 British soldiers and their armored pedal car be involved in it. But it would be a military disaster, and nobody really wants to fight it, and it would lead to a devastating Russian response. But they think this is part of the game of chicken that they are engaged in. They think that if they can conjure up the idea that they could take Kaliningrad, then the Russians will somehow crumble. But the Russians can see the disposition of forces. The Russians can see very well that the US is overstretched, that the US is unable to or unwilling to mobilize its own men for such an encounter. They can more than deal with whatever it is that the Poles, the Baltic states, and the rest of Eastern Europe can dredge up to try and hurl at them. So they know it's not a realistic prospect. So this attempt at bargaining is a complete dead end. It's only going to work not on the Russians, but as always with these sort of pathetic psyops that these clowns engage themselves in, it is the domestic populations, particularly the domestic lawmakers, for instance, British MPs, who, by the way, have the collective intelligence of a dead mayfly, who these military psyops are designed to impress. So this is nonsense. So what is the real game here? And by the way, people keep saying there's an EU flag behind me. This is completely inaccurate. Look, I'm going to move the camera so you can see. Right? See? That's not the fucking EU flag. That's the Starry Plough of Ireland. That's the Irish Revolutionary flag. Learn your flags, everybody. The only way I'd ever have an EU flag on the wall was if I was burning it. And that would be rather inconvenient for, setting fire to the wall of the office I'm working out of. So, going back to the point about what is actually the game here. The game here remains what it's always remained, which is that let's go through this bit by bit. The US is not going to risk its own soldiers, airmen or navy or naval personnel, in a war with the Russians, because particularly in Ukraine or the surrounding area, because that is a fight they cannot win. and it is a fight that would cost them a gigantic amount of men, equipment, resources, and it is going to fight that they could not easily resupply. Think about this for a second. How are they going to, with the Russian submarine fleet ranging around the Atlantic, how on earth are they going to resupply with the resources that will be required to sustain a fight with the Russians? They can't fly all that stuff in, and besides, the Russian missile systems will be seeking out their transport aircraft. So how on earth are they going to get it across the Atlantic with the Russians able to sink their ships? Now, of course, the US can respond and try and counter the Russian submarine threat and missile threat, but they're still going to lose a lot. So how are they going to do any of this? It was never meant to actually lead to a fight between Russia and the United States directly. That was never on the cards. This was meant to be an outsourced war run by the US and the British against Russia, using Ukrainians as the cannon fodder. So that is the game that remains in place today. There's going to be no US intervention. There's going to be no Western European intervention either. Not the British, not the French, not the Germans, and certainly not the Italians. The German Bundeswehr is in absolutely no condition to fight. Don't believe me, believe their own reports. They can, do Nazi salutes and march around a bit if they like, but that's about all they can do. French army may be in a slightly better condition, but not in a condition to sustain a fight with a near million-strong Russian force that sits in and around Ukraine. The Russians have had a decade now, or 11 years now, to start getting themselves to the point where they could first of all build missile systems that could effectively destroy large areas of Western Europe. I mean, they already had it in terms of the nuclear missiles from back they inherited from the Soviet Union, but to update that arsenal with new and improved versions and wholly new missile systems, they have done so over the past decade or so. They have also had now almost 3 years now to totally upgrade their military production system, which they have successfully done. They also have an ally in the Chinese who, for all their rather, shall we say, subtle and moderate statements about the Ukraine-Russia war, isn't going to let Russia go down or be destroyed by the sanctions regime. That would go against the strategic priorities of the Communist Party of China's leadership. Other point that needs to be emphasized is that they also have the DPRK's military on their side now, and apparently it seems that DPRK soldiery will be regularly appearing on the front lines and going forward, hence why there's been a lot of talks between the North Koreans and the Russians recently, and also the North Korean industrial bases at the disposal of the Russians. So the US and the Europeans are so far behind that, they're almost on a different map entirely. They can't compete with that industrially or militarily. So this idea that they're going to take Kaliningrad as a joke, this idea that they were ever going to wade in and take on the Russians in Ukraine, also a joke. These are all games that are played here. You see, when the Europeans and the British and the Americans say, "Oh, Putin's all talk," this is a classic case of psychological projection. It's they're all talk, they're all threat. They can't do anything, and they know that, which is why their only plan, and this is point 2, their only plan is to do what? It's to keep Ukraine in the game, whether it is with Zelensky, and I think it will still be with him, or somebody else. I mean, if maybe the Brits want to try Zelensky's hand at this, I don't think they're going to do that though. I think Zelensky's there to the bitter fucking end. So, reason why is because, remember, the game here hasn't changed. The game remains the same, which is from the early 1990s onwards. In fact, if you want to go back from the mid 1940s onwards, we go back to the insurgency run by the British and the Americans in Western Ukraine using fascist forces that they recruited immediately after World War II. But let's just take this from the modern era. In the modern era, the game from the earliest period of Ukrainian statehood was to take over the running of the Ukrainian state, to run it as a neo-colony, which they successfully have done, to then use the Ukrainian population as a military battering ram to be turned against the Russian Federation, and to use the war that would then be provoked by the British and by the US imperialists to start a war that would be won not necessarily on the battlefield, but via the sanctions war. That was the plan. That still is the plan. It's the only plan they've got. They can't do anything else. So the plan is to secure the Zelensky system, or the Maidan system more accurately, in place. That will probably involve keeping Zelensky at the top, because to remove him would be to destabilize the situation. You see, the thing is, at the moment, and this was true of regimes like the Hitlerite regime, for instance, the biggest reason why they didn't get rid of old Adolf, the failed Austrian watercolor artist, was that they needed to keep some stability in the system. If they killed off Hitler, threw him in prison, etc., tried to put somebody else in place, what would have happened was that all the different factions in the Nazi hierarchy, and there were multiple different factions inside the Nazi party and inside the German state and inside the German military. If they'd have removed Hitler in 42, 43, 44, 40, or even early 45, what would have happened was all these factions would have had to agree upon a successor. And it's according to various different histories, none of them really could. They all knew, like the military hierarchy in the Nazi state in Germany in the Third Reich period, knew they were militarily fucked by probably around about mid 1942. The loss in Stalingrad was the point when they knew they were screwed. And 1943, just within the loss in the Battle of Kursk, just confirmed it. They knew they couldn't win. The only question then was, well, how did they lose and try and save themselves? They couldn't agree on that either. See, the Nazi hierarchy, led by the Austrian watercolor artist, kept insisting on no, not one step back, stand here, fight to the last man, etc., which of course produced battles with an enormous amount of casualties, but didn't do them much good in terms of actually preserving their forces. And it was because that the German political and economic hierarchy, the German ruling class themselves, also couldn't agree on what they wanted to do. They wanted to try and make peace with the Western Allies, and to then either turn the Western Allies and themselves against the Soviet Union in a war that, by the way, I don't think they'd have won, even if they would have managed to do that, or to at least reach some sort of peaceful settlement, force a peace on the Soviet Union by making a separate one with their allies. None of this worked. I don't think it would have worked either. So the German hierarchy couldn't agree on anything, and so they were stuck with the Austrian watercolor artist, even though many of them knew that he was a military idiot, that they were sinking with him, that the Nazi party itself was an utterly chaotic and dysfunctional force. And in the end, basically, Germany was stitched together by essentially a military dictatorship to keep it secure. And the only thing that held all the different competing groups together in Germany was the continuation of the war and the portrayal of the war as an actual existential threat against Germany itself. And that's what knitted them together. They didn't have any alternatives. They couldn't agree on any way forward. And therefore, they stuck with the Austrian watercolor artist. And this ultimately meant that the war went on to the point where the regime itself had to be completely militarily and politically destroyed. How is this a comparison to Ukraine? Now, there are, of course, key differences here. Ukraine, the Nazis, for whatever else you could say about them, were not exactly the puppets of the British and the Americans. The Zelensky regime very much is. So the point is, though, that there is a similarity in terms of the various different contending parties within the Maidan regime. You have the Zelensky group and Yermak. You have like you have Poroshenko. You have people like Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev. You have Zaluzny, who is very much a sort of pure MI6 creature. Now, and you have various other oligarchs floating around, like Pinchuk and the notorious and I think still imprisoned Kolomoisky, but he'll still have some influence out there. Now, the problem that they've got, even those who know damn well they can't win, is that they don't have the Ukrainian ruling groups don't have anything that they can agree around. They look they are desperate to preserve themselves, but they can't just go out and sign a peace deal with the Russians. First of all, because the Russians won't accept the terms that Zelensky and co have dreamed up. Secondly, all of these groups are tied organically now by 1,000 strands to the West, to the British and the Americans in particular. The Germans and the French are in there as well. And it is because they are completely dependent on the British and the Americans for military and financial assistance, but also for their escape routes for them as individuals, that they are completely pawns in the hands of their imperial masters in London and Washington. Many of them, I think, like even like a fool like Klitschko, knows that they're militarily screwed, but they don't know what to do and they can't agree on a way forward. Zoom out onto a further, take a wider view. The British and the US imperialists, their game remains the same. They still need to collapse Russia. They still need to be able to asset strip and destroy it, and to restore Yeltsinite rule. Now, nothing they've done has worked so far, but they still need that. So they need to pursue this war, because this is the only this is the only chance that they've got of achieving those objectives. So what they want to do is to keep the Kiev regime stabilized and keep the war going, meaning keep sending the men by the thousands to the front, keep pumping in the mercenaries and the NATO military advisors, who we all know are actually running the war, keep the frontline staff with as much meat as the Russians can shoot at, and hope against hope that if they just do that, that something will turn up. I mean, I've said this many times before, but I will keep re-emphasizing this point. And if what they plan to do, if they can't force the Russians into an agreement that allows them to preserve the Kiev regime, and I've gone into many times before why the Russians can't allow the Kiev regime to be preserved, they wish to keep the war going up to the point where Russia not only has to take the entire coast of what was once Ukraine, so all the way down to Odessa, and then link up with Prednestrovye, Transnistria, but also that they then have to take Kiev itself, and they have to take, of course, in further east they've got Kharkov. So they have to take Kharkov. They want to make them have to take Kiev. They want to make them have to take as much of Ukraine as possible. Why? Well, because the way the thinking goes in British and American military circles, I think British in particular, is that, well, the more we force the Russians to take, the more land we force them to take, the more resources we force them to expand, the more we can spin the war out, the better a chance we've got of achieving something via sanctions or some other political degeneration inside Russia. Maybe something goes wrong with the economy. Maybe something turns up. And if they force the Russians to take as much of Ukraine as possible, force the continuation of the war, maybe right up to the point of forcing the Russians to go to the far western border, they then launch what the British have longed to do for the entirety of this war, which is turn it into a guerrilla war and terrorist operation. And force the Russians to deploy a large amount of troops all the way across Ukraine, force them to try and set up, either absorb Ukraine or set up some kind of Russian-friendly Ukrainian state run from central Kiev, run from the center of Ukraine around Kiev. And that's what they want to do. They want to just keep it going. And if they can't get a deal out of the Russians, which they won't. Now, the contrary to that, or counter to that, is that the Russian view, which is that there's several different points of view inside the Russian hierarchy. Some of them just want to say, fuck it, let's just go all the way to the west and knock this regime over. Others, of course, are still desperate for some kind of deal, which is why you end up with these sort of compromise on the battlefield between those who wish to go all the way and those who wish to fight like they want to make some kind of agreement. But there will be no agreement to be had. And the thing is, you can see bit by bit that the Russian hierarchy is realizing this and is having to adjust accordingly. They're hoping, I think, that the Kiev regime collapses of its own accord, but I don't think it's going to. I think that there's too many men with guns stood behind it. I think that the British and the United States will continue to bankroll it. I don't think that Trump is going to withdraw funds from Kiev in the end. I think what they'll do is they'll funnel money to it via the Europeans somehow. They'll either seize the Russian assets or force the Europeans to pick up the bill. But the Kiev regime will continue to get funds. It will continue to be kept afloat. The gigantic amount of debts that the Kiev regime has will continue to be serviced, shall we say. Anything to keep the war going. And that's where it's going to go. And I'm going to keep repeating this because I think it goes against the more historical interpretation. So let's just summarize here. One, there will be no deal between Russia and the US other than a recognition of the new borders when they are established, or a tacit recognition. Two, there will be no European or US intervention in and around Kaliningrad or anywhere else, because the Europeans and the Americans know damn well that's a war they can't win. Three, the war will be decided on military terms, decided from Moscow in the end. And that actually is something that the British and the United States are happy to go along with, because in their mind, and that enables them to shift the war to an indefinite guerrilla and terrorist campaign. And that's the way it's going to go. All this guff from Trump, all this noise is meaningless. Eventually, what's going to happen is that the Russians are going to be forced to take out the Kiev regime, to take Kiev itself, to hold down the Banderite flag there, and probably have to replace that Maidan government, maybe with a Ukrainian government that is made up of exiled Ukrainians who are currently inside the Russian Federation. And then, as I've said before, tie in any new Ukrainian state they ultimately create to the kind of defense and integration agreements that they've got with Belarus, which, by the way, was on the table for a while between Ukraine and Russia in the 90s and early 2000s. That's part of the reason why you got the Orange Revolution in 2004, 2003, 2004, and that whole process that went on there, precisely because the Europeans and the Americans and the Canadians wanted to act to make sure that their plots in Ukraine continued forward with President Yushchenko, who was, of course, just a stooge of the West. Right. So that should address some of those questions that have come in on the chat. Again, I find myself having to repeat these questions, these answers, because every time there's a new development, like every time Trump opens his fucking dumb orange gob, like people panic and think that something else is really happening. No, the same game is going on, as has been going on for many, many years. And the presidents come and go, but the game doesn't change. Right. So let's see. So, hello to Crowfeather on Rumble, Yep, X, Mark Grill, Mo1917, Luca, who says, what was Zelensky's plan that triggered the NATO-backed protests in Ukraine? As to West Asia, what's the logic behind France and Britain calling for the Palestinian statehood? Well, I think Zelensky's plan essentially was probably bargaining more than anything else. It was closing those US controlled or diverting control of those US agencies, which apparently were set up by Biden back in the day when he was viceroy of Ukraine. By the way, everybody, be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. It was an attempt to basically try and secure more resources from the West by saying, well, me, the great hero Zelensky, can I can take control of these things that you set up, and unless you give me what I want, I'm going to fuck with your agencies, because these two agencies are nothing to do with being anti-corruption. They are means by which the US in particular exercises influence in the Kiev regime. And so then, of course, the predictable protests broke out, backed up by the US in particular, and Zelensky backed down, and new arrangements were made. And so this was a negotiation process with his handlers, basically, for various different things, some of which we know about, some of which we don't or won't know about until the memoirs get written. So yes, it was bargaining. And the other question of what's behind the British and the French talk of recognizing a Palestinian state, a lot of it is PR from the point of view of both Macron and Starmer. Starmer in particular is under an awful lot of pressure over his complicity with the US-led genocide of the Palestinian people. And he's becoming even more widely despised and pressurized, even in bourgeois circles now, to do something about it. So recognizing the Palestinian state, which, by the way, if it was to be recognized, would be a state that would be led by Mahmoud Abbas, who is a corrupt, complete comprador and a disgrace. So it wouldn't actually endanger US, British hegemony in West Asia at all, or their attempt to preserve it, given that they will be essentially recognizing a tame puppet regime. Now, that is the PR side of it. It's PR to make it look as if they're doing something, whereas in reality, what they're doing is continuing to aid the Israeli regime in the mass murder and attempted population expulsion from Gaza. The other part of the game is what we've talked about before. There are those in the West, particularly in Britain and the United States, also France, I think, as well, who are absolutely, they've had enough of Netanyahu and his crew. They blame Netanyahu for these problems. They think that he has, by his own aggression, he's a combination of militaristic aggression, corruption, and incompetence, has created a problem for them where one didn't exist before. They think that if they can essentially remove Netanyahu and get somebody in like, I don't know, Yair Lapid or someone else of a more openly liberal disposition, then they can secure Israel for another few decades. And recognizing a rump Palestinian state is their way of basically giving us a fuck you to Netanyahu. Now, it won't work, because the reason why Netanyahu survives in Israeli politics is because essentially he's the only man who's able to pull together viable governments. Nobody else can do it. I mean, the man's a scumbag, but he's the only Israeli politician who's consistently been able to deliver stable coalitions over the last few decades. There's stable coalitions of ultra-reactionaries and fascistic madmen like, Kurdish Peter Griffin and others, and the psychotic accountant Smotrich. But he's the only one who can do that. None of the liberals can do it. Israeli social democracy and liberalism has withered away a long time ago. So now you've got these various different tensions that have been built up within the Israeli state, which Netanyahu is the only one who can build a government around those. And every time he does that, the center of gravity in Israel, politically speaking, goes further and further over towards the fascistic right-wingers. But if the Europeans, or shall we say, the certain elements within Britain and the United States and France got their way and Netanyahu was disposed of, it wouldn't actually make a great deal of difference to the actual behavior of the Israeli regime, nor would it restabilize the Israeli regime. They're just kidding themselves that they can somehow decide to dispose of him and find some mythical moderate who's going to take over. No such person or force exists. So a lot of this is just games in the heads of Macron and Starmer. And if they have the idea that if they recognize a puppet regime run by Abbas, they can somehow also undercut Hamas. Whereas in actual fact, it is only the corruption and rottenness of the Fatah government, Fatah-led government in the West Bank and formerly in Gaza, that made Hamas as popular as it has become. Partly because the PLO got turned into, and the Palestinian Authority got turned into just the policemen of the imperialists. That's why British security services train the Palestinian Authority's security services. They are essentially colonial cops. So these are all the reasons behind it. None of them are good. None of them are going to make a blind bit of difference in terms of the Palestinian liberation struggle. That will ultimately be something that is fought out by the Palestinians themselves, regardless of the squeakings of the pathetic eunuch Keir Starmer. Okay. Sputnik 56 says Venezuela's opposition made up elections are ridiculous. Eddie Liger made a great video debunking the 2024 election lies the bourgeoisie made up. Slumbering Cloth says wonderful if a leader earned the people's respect. That's with reference to Hugo Chavez. So hello to Mystery Man, Jenny, Moving Targets, President Jesus. Tom Jones says we've got Corbyn. Oh no, we haven't. And hello also to TG Wilson. Slumbering Cloth says good luck with Sir Jeremy of Corbyn. Well, I don't think we're going to need luck, to be honest. To answer YepX's question, don't take super chats on the channel because essentially that would involve going through the monetization process, and I can't be doing with that. I tried the monetization process more than 18 months ago now, and all it did was I ended up with like loads of strikes and warnings on the channel because it increases the level of YouTube censorship that you're subjected to. So if you want to support the work of the project, then go take out a subscription on Patreon or go to the Buy Me a Coffee site. All donations and subscriptions gratefully appreciated. Right. So moving targets. Hello. And you say Corbyn is what we have, and he's a dignified man. What does that even mean? What do you mean dignified man? He didn't look too dignified in all of those interviews he gave, where he was asked if he even wanted to be prime minister, and he looked like he was trying to escape from his own skin. So I disagree with you there. Corbyn is what we have. So why should we accept what we're told we've got? Why should we just accept what the bourgeois political system spits up at us? Who, again, I will repeat what I said. He had the chance. He had a mass movement behind him that he could have mobilized at any point and did not. Instead of which, he betrayed that mass movement, allowed thousands of people to be purged from the Labour Party by people who were nominally at least his enemies, and turned over control of his office to people who are very close to the intelligence agencies. Why accept him as the leader? Because sooner or later, you have to accept that these aren't mistakes that he was making. It's not a mistake when you fill your office full of intelligence assets. It's not a mistake when you capitulate to and say that your own supporters are inherently anti-Semitic. It's not a mistake when you give in to every demand that the ruling class make of you. It's not a mistake when you gather a mass movement and fail to use it at all. So why the fuck are you still saying that Corbyn's all we've got? He's a dignified man. He's not all we've got. He's not a dignified man. He ain't anything. Stop looking for a savior, especially one who shuffles around making excuses for himself all the time, who's never addressed his failures, who's never addressed his many betrayals, who's sat in Parliament on a fat salary for as long as I've been alive, whilst the people he claims to care so much about slide into greater and greater poverty. Forget it. It's over. It's done. The chance was there, and it passed. This your party shit is going to end up driven into a ditch very, very quickly, because it's all the same people again. It's all the same combination of opportunists, cowards, weaklings, cynical actors looking for a payday, and pretty much open intelligence assets coming together again to lead people like the grand old Duke of York halfway up the hill again and leave and not even marching them back down, just leaving them there. This is stop accepting this nonsense. Stop accepting this this garbage that gets served up to you and gets called your great hope. What value is there in hope if it's based on a delusion? What value is there in hope that's based on a complete misunderstanding of the facts? That's not hope. That's delusion and illusion. So stop falling for it. Don't feel bad about falling for it the first time. Feel bad about falling for it the second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time. Because what time are we on now? Corbyn is defunct, but he means well. I don't agree with you. I don't agree with you, Q. Lots of people say that, but I cannot, and no one should forgive the way he completely, repeatedly betrayed and abandoned his own supporters over and over and over again. People are far too fucking forgiving with this guy. Hello to Howard Beale on Twitter or X. Kolazov says, thoughts on the Online Safety Act and will VPNs be banned? Well, the thing is, the Online Safety Act is, of course, about internet censorship. They've dressed it up with the idea that it's about protecting children. Look, it's not. It's about blocking access to sources of information which they don't want you to see. It's about censoring what people can see online. And it shouldn't be a surprise that this is something that Starmer's put his name to. This is exactly the kind of thing that Starmer's into. I don't think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be able to actually ban VPNs or anything like that. There's too many VPNs and there's too many browsers with VPNs built in. I think what they're going to do is keep on trying to censor the internet, but it's not really going to work. You see, the thing is, every time they try and do this, it usually ends up with more innovations popping up as to how to get around it. And that's what'll end up happening with this. It'll be largely ineffective. Right. Walter Stolzing says, Königsberg, where Kant's grave serves as a local saint shrine nowadays, visited by newlywed couples. Well, interesting. I have to keep a lookout for it. Malankaya Rusi says, I love how Polish politicians say Ukraine must keep fighting so we don't have Russia on our borders, like we have for decades. Yeah, complete nonsense. The Polish reactionaries are particularly dumb. Right. I've answered the flag question. Is Keir Starmer having another male model party? Well, I don't know, and nor do I really want to know. Right, who else have we got here? Rocinante 3003 says the entire Spanish military has 0 tanks. Yeah, well, not a surprise. Like they're not going to be sending the Spanish army over to fight Russia and Ukraine. It was always a nonsense. Sid Hatfield says, I'll bet Eric Prince has portions of his private army stationed in Ukraine as we speak. Well, probably. They'll keep sending mercenaries, certainly. Keep sending mercenary guys from Britain and America who are ex-military or recently took early retirement from the military to go and do jobs in Ukraine. But they won't be able to find enough of those to shift the balance in their favor. I mean, it'll make Eric Prince a few more million, but all it'll do is end up with a whole bunch of dead mercenaries. Rocinante says the entire Spanish military has 0 tanks. The Army, Navy, and Air Force could fit in Santiago Bernabeu. Yeah, well, the entire British Army could fit inside like one of the I think Villa Park these days, or certainly their fighting units could. So this isn't serious. These aren't serious propositions being put forward here. This is just noise. Sid Hatfield says the Galen organization, that's Reinhard Galen, was folded into the Western power structure by the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps. That's true. Hello to Marius. Greg's back, who says, are we still trying to cease the means of production? I think you mean seize, Greg. And yeah, we got that scheduled in for next Tuesday. I do hope you're available. Malankaya Rus says, Poland has so much weaponry on paper. Yeah, they have big military on paper as well. There's quite a number of Poles who have served in Ukraine, but probably not with that's probably not with a particularly good experience to draw on, given how that's gone. Right, who else have we got here? Sid says Nazi Germany wasn't the strictly regimented power structure that many think it was. It was actually a libertarian style free-for-all with several separate power structures within. Yeah, that was even in like the school level history show that they put on for us when we were teenagers, when we were learning about the Nazi period. It's called The Nazis: A Warning from History. As far as I remember, it wasn't too bad. Basic liberal interpretation, Nazis bad, etc. But all communists. But they did make this point that, like, the Nazis, for all they called themselves National Socialists and sort of aped various different communist and socialistic type messages and styles and methods of mobilization. The actual way they ran the state was often completely chaotic, with like you had party structures and state structures overlapping each other. Apparently, the old Austrian watercolor artist himself liked to have like multiple people doing the same job so that they would compete harder with each other. So it was complete chaos often within the Nazi hierarchy, which is why you ended up basically with like a military dictatorship more than a sort of political regime by the end. Right. Just going through the comments here. Marius says also keeping Russia tied down in Ukraine reduces Russian ability to interfere with imperialist plans elsewhere, especially in the Middle East and Africa. Syria is one notable example of this. That's true. That'll be a factor in the calculations of the British, the French, and the United States. The imperialist countries will think, well, if we can't win in Ukraine, we can at least ensure Russia doesn't get in the way of us elsewhere. Not that that will save them in the end. Hello to Matt Parker. And Molotov cocktail. And Greg supports Russia, so we're not. So we are not in complete disagreement there. Malan Kayarus says people were still dying until mid-50s in Poland and USSR because of those Nazi stay-behind losers. Yes, essentially a CIA and MI6 war on the Soviet Union there. 346 of you watching so far. Be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. Maria says between 1962 and 1979, there was a tacit but never formalized agreement between the US and USSR where Latin America, besides Cuba, was off limits for Moscow and Eastern Europe was off limits to US, while Asia and Africa remained up for grabs influence-wise. Interesting. Let's keep going. Greg is doing well tonight. Says Ukraine is a corrupt, money laundering, child trafficking cesspit of a country. Well, that's largely accurate. I mean, it's been made so by the Ukrainian ruling class and their masters in London and Washington. In fact, every place where the British and the Americans make their foul presence felt, it turns into a crime-infested nightmare. Look at Kosovo, for instance, or look at look at Israel, because that's basically the same. What else we got here? Does anyone know a concise and truthful history of the Maidan coup and or a history of Ukraine post-2014? That's from Michael Russell. I think the Jacques Beau book on the special military operation deals with some of that, and that's quite good. Also, such things are mentioned in the work of Professor Richard Sackwell and others. So those sources have quite a bit of the detail about the coup. Also, the work of Professor Ivan Kachanovsky on the Maidan itself, particularly the false flag sniper attacks. So you can find Ivan Kachanovsky on Twitter or X and see his stuff on there, because he's investigated it very comprehensively and has proved beyond a reasonable doubt, I would say, that the sniping was done by fascist forces, maybe of the Georgian Legion, and it was done by the NATO side, shall we say. So that's an interesting thing. So Ivan Kachanovsky's work, Jacques Beau's work, and some of the stuff by Richard Sackwell as well covers quite a bit of what you're looking for there. Mystery Man says the majority of the pretend left here is still fantasizing about social democracy. Our politics are so beyond pathetic here. Well, this is the thing, not only in the United States, but also of Britain and Western Europe. The fantasies that do exist, the political fantasies that exist, are all about social democracy, because that's the only experience within living memory that the great bulk of the working class have had of actual, well, not actual, but like of anything socialistic. And so the dreams always go back to that. So it's not a surprise that that's what comes up, but it's not something we should just merely accept. We should explain to people, like, well, why is it that social democracy came about? Why is it that it died? And why is it that it can't return? And we need to keep explaining that. Sid says, speaking of Israel, I did some reading yesterday, which historically confirmed a set of facts I can suspect for some time now. Well, do tell, Sid. I'm sure you will specify, and indeed you do. Sid adds that the Mossad branched off of the Haganah in the late 1930s in order to assist the Nazi SD with the emigration of German Jews to Palestine, which was made illegal by the British Mandate government. Yes, the collaboration between the Zionists and the Nazis is very well established by now. It shouldn't even be particularly controversial. So, David King says Corbyn is an imperialist, and he's right. Corbyn doesn't talk about British imperialism. He talks about unethical behaviour or bad things being done by British governments. And he and his followers refuse to confront the reality of British imperialism or the origins of the power of the British ruling class. So if you're not going to confront that, then you're not serious about anything. Greg asks, I'm a member of the union. Does that make me a communist? No, not necessarily. But of course, it makes you a potential communist, Greg. So you are a potential worker Bolshevik if you choose to go down that road. I really hope that you do. Because, of course, a union member doesn't necessarily become a communist. I've known many members of trade unions who are so reactionary that they would turn your hair white. The point is, though, that the union membership and getting organized inside a trade union is the first step upon the road, in some respects, to achieving a certain amount of class consciousness, realizing that that the employer is not your friend and never will be your friend, realizing that that there is always going to be a clash between your interests and the interests of the owning class. These are the first steps upon the road to achieving a higher degree of class consciousness. And people can become revolutionized via their interactions with their trade union, particularly if they're engaged in struggle. Or they can become bitter and disillusioned reactionaries who experience the very worst in terms of the cowardice and the corruption that trade unionism has to offer, and end up dropping out entirely. It depends upon how the class struggle shapes up, to be honest. But it can be the first step on the road to becoming a worker Bolshevik. Greg, I really hope that you join the cause. Ogas Cybernetic says no amount of Seven Nation Army chants will make Corbyn more than he is, a synthetic left traitor to the working class. Very good point. Svetlana says Julius Caesar and Corbyn have the same initials, so maybe perhaps that's why Alex calls him a saint. Well, no, I call him the saint because of his the elevation of him to sainthood by his followers, and the way that his followers treat him like some sort of deified figure, that some kind of religious type leader who is going to come along and wave his hand and undo the damage of the ghastly, horrible Thatcherites. And this is the reality of how he's seen by his followers. It's an almost religious movement, because all of the things I've told you about Corbyn, like his refusal to take the possibility of power seriously, his refusal to deal with any of his internal enemies, his refusal to defend his allies, and other things, his capitulation on all the things he said he believed in, all that's true. We can find clearly documented evidence of that. And one day I might go through all of it for you here. But you present this to his more, shall we say, fanatical followers, and they will just refuse to listen to it. They'll say, no, he was undermined by the right-wingers, by the murder, by the evil right-wing press. He was betrayed. And they're like a monarchist making excuses for Louis XVI. Like, oh, no, it wasn't the king. It was the evil advisors. It was the evil people with bad intentions. The king did not know. Corbyn did not know. And they treat him like a religious figure, and also like the way he's talked about as well. Like, oh, he's such a nice man, he's such a decent man, and all that kind of stuff, which I find completely and utterly fucking nauseating, to be honest. Again, it's gone beyond a matter of belief now into the realm of religion, which is where Corbyn's supporters dwell. And if that sounds harsh, because basically we're at the stage where we need to be harsh and direct with people. It's been 10 years. If you think about it now, we are almost in August 2025. And the first time Corbyn won the Labour leadership was late September 2015. That's 10 years ago. 10 years of him, 4 years of him being in charge of the Labour Party, or 4 and a bit. 4 years of continual capitulations and never putting up a fight over anything at any point. Now, I can understand, because I was there. I was involved in this. I can understand people getting excited in the summer of 2015, because I was there. I saw it. I can't understand why some of the same people, having seen all the same things I've seen, are still running around with their hair on fire now about this guy. It's been tested. He's not capable of waging the fight that you think he can wage. He's not the British Hugo Chavez, everybody. I know that there are those out there who would wish that he or somebody else would be, but British Social Democrats are the biggest collection of fucking cowards and tossers anywhere in the world, with their only competition being American Social Democrats, because you're faced with, in this country or in America or in the United States, trying to take on the most vicious, repulsive collection of reactionaries that the world has ever seen, the British and US ruling classes and their servants, their foul servants. And to take them on means to take on a huge degree of risk. These people don't care and have no compunction about ruining your life. Look at what they did to Julian Assange, for instance. They have no hesitation to throw you in prison, to deprive you of employment, to cause you to lose everything that matters to you, or even lose your life. They wouldn't have any hesitation of taking any of that action against you. Sorry, still suffering from the after effects of this wretched cough. But the point is, you take risks going up against that level of power and organization. And that takes a degree of determination and organization on your own part if you're going to do it. Corbyn's not that guy, nor is anybody else on the British left. And the American left's got nobody out there inside like the DSA or any of the other clown organizations like the PSL. None of them are going to do it either. Excuse me for a moment. Going to need to take a refill on the liquid refreshment for a moment. But I'll be back with you in just a moment. Be sure to like and share the stream and take this as a brief intermission. Yeah, I've returned with more coffee so we can carry on now. Just trying to catch up with the comments here. So, Potted Rodent says the correct thing here, which is there are no saviors within the system. That's true. The saviors are all around you. The saviors are yourselves, the people in your community, the people in your workplace. It is not about some fucking genius who's going to walk forward and guide us to the promised land. Let's go back to the original opening of this show, where we were talking about Hugo Chavez. Now, Hugo Chavez is dismissed by Trotskyites in the Anglo-American left as, you know, oh, he's a reformist, he's a nationalist, he's a caudillo, you know, figure. But bear in mind that what we said at the very beginning of the show about what made Chavez unique was the fact that he had this ongoing back and forth constant relationship with the masses of Venezuela. And so Chavez wasn't just some guy who stepped forward and says adelante or something, or forward, forward everybody follow me. He was a constant back and forth with the proletariat and the peasantry and the wider masses of Venezuela, that made that revolutionary process into what it is, and made it so difficult for the reactionaries and the imperialists, the internal reactionaries and the imperialists, to destroy. That makes him a revolutionary. That's not what British and American social fucking democracy is. We don't have anybody like that. Or British social democracy sees the proletariat as an object. They don't see the proletariat as the subject of politics. They see them as the object, as an object to be pushed around by the great leaders. I don't believe in, I mean, our movement may well develop great leaders in the future, but the fact is we're starting from fucking scratch here. And I would rather face that reality than waste another decade running around chasing shadows, which is what trying to recreate British social democracy is. You are chasing a phantasm. I would rather admit, as Amilcar Cabral once said, claim no easy victories and tell no lies, but also don't bullshit people. Look, we're in a bad situation. Whether you're in Britain or in France or in Germany or in the United States, we're all in a bad situation. The left in our countries went off the rails over 70 years ago, and we have generation after generation of people who've grown up with the wrong idea about what communism is, what socialism is, what the role of the proletariat is. We're having to start from scratch. Now, the good news is the system is disintegrating piece by piece, and like more and more people are realizing that something is fundamentally wrong. So we have opportunities here, but we don't get to move forward if we keep trying to sell people the same shit, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, or this fucking Mamdani idiot in New York. Like it's an incredibly petty bourgeois mentality to keep looking for saviors. I mean, fuck me, the American left has celebrated the return of the Messiah more often than the American Christians have. They've had more messiahs than some of the dodgy American Christian cults. Like David Koresh had a more a more grounded sense of reality than the American left does when it comes to their messiahs. I mean, religious people, particularly Christians, often say that atheists, or particularly Marxists, are making up for their lack of belief in God by seeking messiahs elsewhere. And I think the American left, American petty bourgeois left, is certainly making up for their lack of belief in the Almighty, with a finding of false messiahs around every single corner. The British left's not far behind them, by the way. But yeah, no, it is far better to be absolutely honest about the condition that we're in than to pretend that there is a victory around the corner, pretend that voting for Zoran Mamdani or Bernie Sanders or AOCIA or Jeremy Corbyn or Jean-Luc Mélenchon is going to lead to anything other than a disaster. Let's be honest. People, it is a very difficult thing to do, to build a revolutionary party anywhere in the world. And I'm not, I'm going to say that we are, up against the worst repression. We're not. There's more repression now than there used to be, though. But it is better to build a small, at the moment, but solid core of revolutionaries than it is to try and say we're going to run a mass movement, into the ground, as it turns out. Because if you try and run a mass movement on a false basis, it gets exposed by the real contradictions and antagonisms in the society, pulling it apart very quickly. Potty Rodent asks, what is Cockshot's political leaning? Is he a Trotsky guy? I don't think so. He is someone whose work I do need to catch up on in terms of reading more of his stuff, though. Matt Parker asks, Alex, how do we initiate the revolution? I don't know at this stage. I'm not going to sit here and claim that that I know the answer to how the revolution in the imperial core nations is going to proceed. I don't know at this stage. And I'm not going to claim to sit here and say I've got a map from A to Z on this one, because I don't. I'm not going to make the grandiose claims of a Bob Avakian, for instance. No. What we have to, I would ask everybody to, as always, revisit Lenin on these questions and really revisit Lenin, not the cliched version of Lenin that they sort of put on posters. But if you're talking about strategies and tactics of the revolution, what you have to realize is that the true revolutionaries actually are prepared to look at and evaluate the situation facing the working class and make a call at each stage as to what is the appropriate tactic to apply. And this is why, like, things like Foucaultism, or what is passed off as Maoism, or like insurrectionism or Blanchism, are very silly, because what that is that's completely anti-Leninist. All of those who tie themselves to, right, we're going to pursue the revolution through Foucaults that we're going to set up in and around the London area, or we're going to read Mary Geller's mini manual of urban guerrilla warfare, and we're going to set up some urban guerrilla groups in Cincinnati, and we'll start there, and we'll go across America. Being wedded or welded would be the more appropriate term to one tactic is completely anti-Leninist. And that goes for right opportunism as much as left opportunism. Right opportunism, personified in the past by people like Bernstein, Kautsky, Khrushchev, and others, is completely welded to the idea of that we have to proceed via the peaceful reforming road. That's what all the communist parties in Europe and the CPUSA were welded to for decades. And that is dogmatism and opportunism. You need to evaluate at each stage where the class struggle is, where the working, in terms of its intensity, where the working class is in terms of where are the advanced workers in particular. If you're a communist, first question is where are the advanced workers in terms of their understanding? Are they coming towards us? Are we building our organization? How integrated are we into the struggles of the working class? Do we have enough of a presence in the working class to affect anything? And for a long period of time, the answer might be that we just don't have it. And that's what makes being a revolutionary in a time of reaction something of an unrewarding experience. because there were movements inside the United States, for instance, that tried very hard for a certain period of time. I mean, I've just mentioned unfavorably Bob Avakian there of the American version of the Revolutionary Communist Party, but that were when they started out, as others in this chat have pointed out before, they were for a while a serious organization in that there were people in their leadership, including Avakian for a time before he became just a parody of himself, who were actively trying very hard to root what became, I think it was before they were the RCP, that was the Revolutionary Union, was it? Became the RCP. But that organization tried very hard to root itself in some of the most militant sections of the American working class. And they had some success, small success, for a little while, enough that the FBI got interested in them, as the book on them by I think it's Leonard makes clear. The book Heavy Radicals, they did attract the attention of the federal authorities, and that was because they were trying to make inroads in these sections of the American working class. But the fact is that, like, the great bulk of the American working class was just simply not ready to move in the 70s and the 80s. Yes, life was deteriorating for many American workers. Yes, the concessions made in the New Deal period were being brought to an end. Reaganism was the thing. But enough of the American working class, particularly its upper end, continued to at least think they were going to do all right out of the system for another 20, 30, 40 years after that change. And so if you're a revolutionary in 1983 in the United States, you're faced with some of the most difficult situations you've ever been in. Same would be true in Britain, because you're trying to recruit to a revolutionary organization when the great bulk of the working class still has reformist delusions. Now, in Britain, there were chances where that could have been fractured. I would argue, unlike in the United States, where there were a different manner of struggle was going on, which I will comment more on in future episodes, but let's just use the British example. There could have been revolutionary struggles breaking out in Britain because of the intensity of class struggle from about 67, 68 through to potentially as late as early 85, though some may disagree with that. And if there had been a communist party that was actually a revolutionary party, not a reformist joke, which is what we had, then the industrial struggles could have been pushed in a revolutionary direction. Some of them were going in a revolutionary direction in the 1970s. But because the communist parties, which did have roots in the masses, their only answer was vote Labour, then all those struggles went to waste. You see, if you have a revolutionary vanguard party, meaning that you have the advanced layer of or enough of the advanced layer of the working class recruited, when the class struggle intensifies, which it inevitably will, when the working class moves into action, if you have recruited and politically educated and organizationally trained enough advanced workers who have a certain amount of influence as organic intellectuals within their workplaces and communities, whose word is listened to, then you can find that they, as worker militants, and you as a communist party, can actually grow in size and influence quite quickly when the conditions are right. The conditions are becoming more ripe for revolution in the United States, Britain, and elsewhere, and the attraction of social democracy is declining as it becomes more and more obvious that we're just not getting that back again. And so the conditions are improving. I'm not going to say what sparks a revolution, because I'm not going to, for a moment, claim to understand the revolutionary process in other people's countries. I'm not going to claim that I know exactly how it's going to play out in my own. But what we need to forge right now are necessarily small, but iron, shall we say, tempered in steel tempered revolutionary organizations built on a solid core of worker militants and, should we say, worker theoreticians of communism, who are prepared to be tactically flexible as the situation demands it, and who understand the need to constantly analyze and assess the class struggle and adopt appropriate tactics. Sometimes it's appropriate to run an election. Sometimes it's appropriate to boycott an election. Sometimes it's appropriate to call for a general strike. Sometimes that's actually not the right decision to take. Sometimes it would be appropriate to organize or make the demand for the removal of a bourgeois government via insurrection. Other times that would be a disastrous thing to do. And the genius of people like Lenin and Mao and Castro and others like them is that they were able to understand those questions, able to understand when it was tactically correct to defend, for instance, in July of 1917, or shall we say, later autumn of 1917, to defend the provisional government against Kornilov, for instance, or to sign an agreement with the treacherous and slippery bastard known as Chiang Kai-shek to secure joint fighting against the Japanese, or how to build the revolutionary struggle in Cuba, going through different waves of struggle, as Castro understood. See, that's what distinguishes great revolutionaries. It's a tactical flexibility and an understanding of when to move and when not to move, based on building rock-solid revolutionary organizations. And that's our task now. So I'm not going to sit here and say, I have a roadmap that takes us to socialism in this country or that. No. The task at the moment is to build our organizations. And that requires patience and discipline and determination, all the things that the left in Britain and America and France and other imperialist countries completely lack, because those are things which have been actively discouraged in the working class and in the intelligentsia by the ruling class, for good reason from the ruling class's point of view. Right. Moving through. Greg's on a roll tonight. CIA did Maidan. Greg is correct. You are most welcome to join us, Greg, if you continue in this vein. Just going through. Will Johnson says direct flights from Moscow to Pyongyang restart after 27 years. Well, you see, this is an example of how the imperialists have ended up like shooting themselves in the feet. They've actually made the alliance that always was there between Russia and the DPRK much more comprehensive than it was before. Bear in mind that Putin's first trip overseas was actually to the DPRK all the way back in the year 2000, 25 years ago. There's footage of it online. You can see it. And you can see how much more developed Pyongyang and other areas in the DPRK are now than they were back in 2000. So this idea that this is some backward hermit kingdom is a joke. The DPRK's come a long way economically, scientifically, and technologically over the last quarter of a century. But that was Putin's first visit, because that was to reaffirm a mutual defense pact. It's also the case that the Russians have consistently, I think, traded with and aided the DPRK under the table, whilst proclaiming loudly that they were abiding by the Washington sanctions. These are, of course, manifestations of the contradictions in the Russian system. But now that the US imperialists have basically tried to openly come out and destroy the Russian system, there's no reason for the Russians to pretend anymore. And so the DPRK is not only openly militarily aiding the Russians, they are economically assisting them by lending their industry to Russian war production and providing, of course, military equipment to the Russians. This is all strengthening the system in the DPRK. And now you have direct flights there. I mean, it's tempting to try and get there myself. Greg back in with another banger says CIA is the biggest terrorist organization in the world. Since World War II, they've been responsible for most regime changes and interventions all over the world. Is this the same Greg as from the other night, or are Greg's politics more complicated than he initially let on? Is Bolshevism Jewish? Asks Greg. No, simple answer. There was a myth put about by the Russian reactionaries that Bolshevism was a Jewish plot, but this can be disproved by just looking at the composition of those who led the Bolshevik Party, and also Judaism is not an ethnicity; it's a religion. See, I believe on. This is the same. The correct attitude to take towards Judaism is that it's no more possible to be an ethnic Jew than it is to be an ethnic Christian. It's like my parents were both baptized into the Church of England. Does that make me an ethnic Anglican? It's a completely ridiculous notion. The idea that there is religion equals ethnicity. It's a completely reactionary and bizarre idea, only beloved by anti-Semites and Zionists, as it turns out. So the idea that there is this ethnic group called the Jews is fundamentally ridiculous. Judaism, as some of the Orthodox rabbis say, is about a relationship with the Torah. It's not about anything else. It's about a relationship with God and the Word of God. So the idea of ethnic Jews is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I might start calling myself an ethnic Anglican and see how that goes down. Let's see. Sid says, in the United States, the Americans have been almost completely severed from their socialist past, which historians... hang on, that's disappeared. Yes, but I see what you're saying there, Sid. The American socialist past is loudly and ferociously denied by the American ruling class. And of course, it's entirely in their interest to do so. Greg's back again, says, I've been on many strikes. I've been in the CWU for 26 years. I guess that makes me more commie than most of you. In some ways, Greg, you're right. 26 years, huh? Guess that makes you, well, not necessarily a postal worker. You could be a worker in British Telecom. I'm not going to call for you to out yourself, though. What do you make of the current union leadership? My guess is that you're not in favor of it. Current union leadership, of course, being a certain Mr. Dave Ward, CBE, Commander of the British Empire. That's the kind of people we got leading the unions, everybody. Right. Has a John Sim Corbyn biopic been greenlit yet? Asks President Jesus. It surely is only a matter of time, featuring him being a very nice man. That's what I think of that. Matt Parker says Corbyn just wants to skewer Labour. He's not bothered about actually winning. Well, here's one for you. If Corbyn did get a decent amount of seats for your party, whatever the fuck that means, and Labour also got enough seats to keep itself in the game, and the Liberals got enough seats, there would then be an enormous pressure applied to him to go into coalition with Labour and the Liberals to keep the fascists out, meaning Farage and co. And in my estimation, Corbyn would go into coalition with Wes Streeting or Keir Starmer to keep the fascists out, meaning reform. And he would agree to a programme of government that would be completely reactionary and would attack all of the people who just voted for him, and he would immediately betray everybody. That's the character of the man we're dealing with here, everybody. And by the way, Zara Sultana would do exactly the same. Okay. Just going through here. But Yep X says, I'm seeing way too many self-proclaimed communists as well as various outlets and personalities that support Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that's because they're all social democrats. They're not They've revealed themselves as not being communists. And they haven't done a proper evaluation of his time in the Labour Party or the viability of social democracy. Now, there is a legitimate debate to be had. Just going to take some more coffee there. There is a legitimate debate to be had about like how to approach this new party of Corbyn's, because they're claiming 500,000 have signed up to it. Well, that's basically a mailing list at the moment. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get 500,000 people turning out to meetings or something like that, but there will be quite a few. The question of like what to do about that is an interesting one, because I think that there will be workers attracted towards this Corbyn party. Maybe not many, but some. And there will be people who do legitimately want socialist change, and we should at least be able to talk to them. So communists will need to discuss amongst ourselves like what's the best way to approach these people. But I think you have to point out to them that even if what you want is what Corbyn says he wants to deliver, his track record on delivering these things is dreadful. And also, to even get the social democratic reforms that these people want would entail a struggle that the social democratic leaders are just simply not equipped to wage. To get any reforms out of this system whatsoever, you need a leadership which is far more determined and a mass base of workers who are far more militant and politically educated and determined than that which exists at the moment. So we have to make an approach to the people attracted towards Corbyn's new merry band of saints, but we can't do that by panning or by pretending that Corbyn is something that he is not. Molotov Cocktail says Corbyn is channeling political energy that could otherwise be used for revolution into bourgeois parliamentarianism, where in the ballot box where it dies. I think there's a certain amount of truth there. Yet X says, a long time ago you had a discussion on the Green Party in the UK and US as you discussed how they are not to be trusted. I can't find a clip on that. Can you discuss it again? There's 2 episodes on the Green Parties on the YouTube page. One dealing with England, one dealing with Scotland. You can find those back in the live broadcast feed. Maybe I'll make a playlist out of it. Wonder if Chris Smalls would come on the show. Maybe. I'll have a look at that. American Mystery Man's looking to join the American Party of Labour. Well, I don't know a lot about them, but they look like pretty much like a rusted over sect, to be completely honest. There maybe are the least revisionists, but it doesn't seem like they've got much of an organization going on. Now, I could be wrong about that. So by all means look into it, but they don't look to actually be very active. Ogas Cybernetics says the American Party of Labour has a lot of trans members. For your information, the organization is run accordingly. Well, that's what you find with a lot of the so-called anti-revisionist parties. They basically are tiny sects run by a group of nutters, which, for all they have a fine anti-revisionist program, isn't actually what it appears to be. It's often just a social club for the socially inept, shall we say. So do your research. President Jesus says ACP is too confused and revisionist, in my opinion. Interesting. Yes, they do. The ACP does hold with Dengism, which is something I personally completely reject. Scrolling down here. There's another corporate executive assassinated in the United States, apparently, but there you go. Interesting to see who did that one. Is he going to be called Mario this time? Or Bowser? Sid says the ACP is such a young organisation that is still very much in the formative stages. I give it some time before I pass definitive judgment upon them. Well, that's a very good point from Sid. ACP is what? A year old? So it's too early to tell how it's going to turn out, basically. I still maintain the position that I've always maintained, which is that the setting up of the ACP and the breaking with the CPUSA, or I should say the stinking corpse of the CPUSA, that was fundamentally a very progressive move. Now, what the ACP will become, only the struggle will tell. But the very fact that it was set up and the fact that the CPUSA was decisively broken from, these are all good things. Now, the ACP probably has a long and difficult road ahead of it. Undoubtedly, any communist party in the West does. But at least they've taken the first step on that road, and I regard the setting up of the ACP as a positive move. I would say to those who think it's too revisionist or who think it's too Dengist or something, there's probably plenty of people in the ACP who agree with you. So if they are the force in on the American left, which is moving forward at the moment, which has made at least a break with some of the rotten traditions of the past. So research if there's people around you who are active in it and see if you can go and talk to them, would be my advice. Maybe you want to join it, maybe you don't. It's your country, not mine. I can't tell you what to join and what not to. But the fact is that it was a positive development setting it up, and what it becomes in time, the struggle will work that will work its will make its presence felt, and that will be worked out in the fullness of time. Jonas Levinson said Deng can also be described as the man that helped China out of poverty, having initially put the Chinese working class into more poverty, by the way, and nearly caused the collapse of the system, by the way. More on that in the upcoming Cultural Revolution episodes. Excuse me. Sorry, I need to take some more liquid on board here. Excuse me. This damn cough keeps hanging around, it seems. So, President Jesus wants to see a me and socialism for all conversation. It'd probably end in disaster. Never seen these people's work, so I can't comment on that. Oh God, excuse me. Rob the Slav enjoyed the Waco reference. Well, hope you're enjoying that. T.G. Wilson says there's a very weird millenarianism in U.S. society. Yeah, I've certainly observed that. Do we need a Trojan horse party? Asks Matt Parker. No, not really. Right. Ogas Sabanelli says Cockshot has great work on the stochastic modeling of an average rate of profit. Okay, interesting. Marius enjoyed the Avakian reference. Glad you did so, comrade. Right. The Wicked Witch of the Southeast says, no such thing as trans people. There are only people who call themselves trans, not all the same material state. Yep. Wicked Witch adds, anyone who plays along with the lie that there are trans people does not understand simple materialism. Also true. It's the idea that you are what you think inside your own head, which is, of course, a complete violation of the very basic application of dialectical materialism. My only quibble, says President Jesus, is how is it different than accommodating religion, which some Marxists do? Well, President Jesus, I mean, I've made my view clear on religion before, which is that there's no reason why a religious person can't be part of the revolutionary movement, but the Communist Party should be a place where it is for the development of, the study of, and the practice of scientific socialism, and that precludes all kinds of religious or cult-like beliefs. However, in the wider movement, it's perfectly possible for Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus to play a very important role in a revolutionary movement. Now, I've met plenty of Christians who considered themselves socialists, and met a few Muslims who consider themselves to be some form of socialist or another, but none of them ever claimed to be something that they are not. And none of them I've never met a serious Christian who actually claims to be Jesus. Like, I've never met a serious Christian who believed himself to be an angel, which is what the Trans Brigade asks people to accept. They ask you to accept accept their fantasies as reality. I've known a number of religious people who will insist and are quite sincere in their beliefs that they are abiding by the strictures of the New and the Old Testaments, and if they live in such a way as they have interpreted from the Bible, that they will go to heaven. But most of them don't ask me to accept that reality their beliefs as concrete and solid and must be immediately enshrined in law. And most of these people's beliefs don't require us to actually do such things as put men in women's prisons, for instance. So the trans thing is much more classified as a cult. And it's a cult that the state, by the way, the bourgeois state, has taken a huge role in actively promoting. So to call it a religion is probably a little bit inaccurate. It's more like a cult, because we all know well, maybe we don't all know, but many of us know and understand the relationship that the American and British states in particular have towards all kinds of cults, the trans cult included. Wicked Witch of the Southeast says autogynephilia is not a religion, it is a sexual fetish. Very true. And you need to call things what they are. And not be afraid of people saying their fucking feelings have been hurt, basically. Christian Smalls apparently arrested and assaulted by Israeli forces. Not a surprise, given how they assault everybody who goes into, like, where is he? Is he in the occupied West Bank? Sid says there was still some semblance of a manufacturing base in the 70s and 80s. Life for the average person was much better than it is now. It has become more visible in the last decade. That's true. Does the SWP have a monopoly on advanced workers? Asks Tommy Douglas Hare. Are you talking about the SWP in Britain? In that case, no, they don't have a monopoly on anything. In British terms, the SWP is principally, and has been for years, despite calling themselves the Socialist Workers' Party, which is a great name, so it's a shame that they've got hold of it. Despite calling themselves that, they are, in effect, a student organization, and have been for fucking decades now, at least 3 decades. And they are still basically a student group. They don't have much of a grip inside the workers' movement at all anymore. They certainly have no real presence amongst the wider masses. So they're not something which is worth taking seriously for the most part. But as we as communists grow our organization, then we'll have to deal with them when it comes to their influence in the student movement, for instance. 390 watching. Be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Okay, so SWP, as Marius points out, in the USA is that's a full-blown like state-run operation. The SWP. I remember listening to the specials that Jimmy Fallon Gong did with a guy who called himself Comrade Chad, I think, on the Program to Chill podcast, where they were talking about how like the SWP was so in the United States was so thoroughly infiltrated that somebody who got thrown out of it actually sued the federal government for violation of his civil rights as he was purged from the SWP in the early 80s, because his argument was that it was so thoroughly controlled by the federal government that essentially by being expelled from it, that the federal government itself had violated his civil rights. He didn't win the case, but it's a very amusing court case to be caught up on, to look at. So the American SWP, James P. Cannon's old organization, completely fucking run by like cranks and state agents these days. Have been for a very, very long time. And I agree with Wicked Witch of the Southeast, which is that if you let in to a communist party a bunch of Christians who then started saying, or a bunch of Muslims or Jews who then started saying that, well, now you need to treat women differently to men. If Christians, if you let in like a Christian or any religious person who came from a religious background where like the equality of men and women was something they didn't accept, and they came in and they tried to impose that as their belief within the Communist Party, then you show them the fucking door, basically. And this is why I say like the like people of various religious persuasions can be very important parts of any sort of broad revolutionary movement. But if you're going to come into a Marxist-Leninist party and try and impose your religious beliefs in it, then that would end with the particularly if these are religious beliefs that are profoundly reactionary, then that would end with the religious person being told that, well, you either shut the hell up and follow democratic centralist discipline and stop trying to impose this idealist reactionary nonsense, or you're shown the door. And that would be the same as with the Trans Brigade. But most of the Christian socialists I've run into don't behave that way. So far, I mean, I'm always prepared to be unpleasantly surprised. When the UK reform government fails, there may be an ideological gap that needs filling. Maybe. Well, we'll see. We may not even get the reform government. Who knows? The ruling class themselves seem to be rather divided on the issue. Malankaya Rus says, who cares about trans? Culture war is not my war. Well, unfortunately, we've been obliged to care about it by the fact that so many of these nutbags tried to destroy various different organizations and also insisted on like violating women's rights. So we've been obliged to care about it in various different countries. And it was been pushed by the ruling class. That's the thing. If it's a trend that's been pushed by the ruling class as a sort of distraction issue or as a division issue, then it's something that needs to be properly critiqued and analysed. You can't just ignore it and hope that it goes away. Right, let's just scroll through some more comments here. Let's Let's try and boost the numbers above 400. We need 11 extra people joining the stream to get us above that number. So be sure to share the stream. Be sure to retweet, etc., etc. Emil Pojogo News says Lenin was funded by the Rothschilds. Categorically untrue. Old dumb lie that's been disproved over and over again. And you're quite boring, so you're banned. Fuck off. And yeah, just to reiterate, the trans thing can't just be dismissed as a distraction, given that it ended up with people allowing dangerous male predators into women's prisons. Like, that's not something you can just dismiss. I think that people who try and throw their hands in the air and say it's just a distraction, we're not dealing with it, are cowards. Basically, if you won't deal with this head on, you are a coward. You don't want to deal with it because there's a bunch of like students or leftists out there who'll scream at you if you try and deal with it as we have. Well, I'd rather deal with it openly and head on and deal with the fact that this is a government-sponsored fucking psyop that was pushed deliberately to try and divide and demoralize working class organizations. And that behind it are a bunch of largely male fetishists and perverts. And you can prove that. And many working class feminists and socialists have done. So stop being a coward and proclaiming that you don't want to deal with this. Now, I'm willing to bet there was plenty of stuff that Lenin and Mao and others got brought up to them that they didn't want to fucking deal with. But these reactionary trends get pushed by the bourgeois, and you have to deal with them. You try and ignore them. People take them up for a variety of reasons because they think they're revolutionary and end up in a complete mess, or organizations end up getting destroyed. You have to confront these things head on. That's the thing. And you know what? There's plenty of cowards out there who refuse to deal, who, when a difficult issue comes up, won't confront it. But if you're claiming to be some sort of Marxist, and you're meant to be a scientific socialist, and you're going to claim that a man can be a woman, or counter that, a woman can become a man, what? Because of a thought that's in his or her head? Then you're not a materialist anymore, and you have no right to criticize any religious person because you've just adopted a belief that's way more ridiculous than anything most religious people hold with. You've embraced cultism. You've embraced a cult promoted by the bourgeoisie. So, and again, like, you have neglected the lessons left to us by Mao, who in Combat Liberalism said that these reactionary trends have to be confronted and criticized properly. And you can't not do it because you want to be friends with somebody. I mean, what is this? Are we serious here or not? Because it's not a serious proposition to say you don't want to deal with something because it might hurt somebody's fucking feelings. Like, for too long, like, the left in the West has been just a social club for the socially retarded. That's what it's been. And I know because I've been in it. It's been a fucking gathering point for people who can't deal with the rest of the world and who are proud to be too weird to deal with the rest of the world. And it's no wonder that none of the working class wants anything to fucking do with it, because it's gone from being organizations of like at least like a militant core of workers like 50, 60 years ago, regardless of how revisionist they became and how misguided their practice was, to being tiny organizations of socially retarded fuck-ups. Who wants anything to do with that? Nobody. So stop this. Stop this nonsense about not wanting to hurt people's feelings. If people will walk out of an organization because they want to hold with the belief that some perverted dude can be a woman because, you know, he's watched too much porn, and has a bizarre collection of fantasies he wants you to respect. If you're not prepared to tell that guy he's fucking wrong, then you have no business being anywhere near something which calls itself a communist party. Go fuck off back to the internet. Right. Okay. Going through some more contributions here. T.G. Wilson says Douglas Valentine's The Phoenix Program is a chilling expose of one of the most secretive and brutal counterinsurgency, mass murder, torture operations of the Vietnam War. Yeah, the Phoenix Program, Phoenix Program was essentially a giant serial killing operation, I would say, run by the CIA and others in Vietnam. And it's no wonder that there were serious allegations that quite a number of serial killers graduated out of there and came back to the United States, because that's essentially what the US was running. So yes, I'll have to check that out. Right. And Matt Parker says that the CPGB was infiltrated and neutered by MI5. Yeah, that was part of the problem. I mean, the MI5 certainly took the destruction, the political destruction of the CPGB very, very seriously. It's in the official history of MI5, in actual fact, how seriously they took it and the amount of times they tried to infiltrate it and ultimately subjugate it. And sadly, they succeeded. Partly, though, this was because of massive mistakes made by the CPGB leaders, which the British state, whilst probably welcoming these developments, didn't need to actually push them to do. They made the mistakes on their own, including the adoption of the British road to socialism. Edward asked an interesting question. Why didn't a national bourgeois element emerge in Latvia or Poland or Czechoslovakia after 1991 like it did in Russia? Interesting question, Edward. I would say that for Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, there was absolutely no history of a national bourgeoisie whatsoever. They were always just compradors who were tied to one form of imperialism or another. Poland, interesting. This is, again, I don't know enough about history, the Polish history, to properly comment on this. The way in which, Czechoslovakia only achieved its independence after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it didn't really have time to form. There was a certain amount of a bourgeois there, but it didn't really have much time to coalesce before it was destroyed or invaded by the Nazis, and proved to be an unstable creation because there was a Czech bourgeois, but the bourgeois was much weaker in Slovakia, which was the much poorer section of that country. And the Poles had a history going back to the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and there were bourgeois elements in Poland, but they were quite weak, just as they've remained quite weak. Russia, again, for all the weaknesses of the Russian bourgeoisie and certainly the Russian comprador bourgeoisie, there was a division within the Russian bourgeoisie prior to October of 1917, where there was a section of them that were just purely tied to Franco-British capital, Franco-British imperialism. There was a section, though, that was a national bourgeois in Russia in 1917. They were too weak to actually to do anything with, for them to take power themselves. And that's why they ended up being pushed aside by the Bolsheviks. But that tradition was there. So historically, that was something that did exist, whereas it didn't exist in Poland or the Czech Republic, never mind the Baltic states. So Russia, being larger and more industrially developed, had a tradition of a national bourgeoisie prior to the coming of the October Revolution, and so that was something that could be, to a certain extent, tapped into after 1991. And also, the sheer size of Russia meant that it was much more difficult to completely subjugate post 1991 Russian Federation than it was like the Baltic states or the Czech Republic or Poland. These are much, much smaller places, which can be much more easily controlled via the application of neo-colonial methods. And in Russia, that was more difficult to do. They thought they had it with Yeltsin, but even within like the Russian bourgeois structures that grew up in the 1990s, there was still like a bourgeoisie in there that wanted to at least trade with the imperialist bloc on the basis of like a relationship of almost equals. The fact that the imperialists would never deal with them as equals, would never treat them with anything other than contempt, kind of got to the point where that national bourgeoisie got increasingly radicalized. They were still very anti-communist and still are, but they've been forced to the point where, to defend their own interests, they had to assume a more active defense of themselves against the imperialists, whereas those other smaller countries were much more easily subjugated. Now, that's a very quick answer to Edward's question. It probably needs way more explanation than I've got time to give tonight, and I would need to research more into Polish and Czech history, Polish history in particular. But I think I'm largely correct in that. But I am prepared to go further into it if comrades think that that's worth doing. Thank you for the get better wishes. I am much better than I was a few days ago, but this thing is like hanging around like a sort of I've got glue in some of the tubes in my head. Okay. Hello to Ben, who's joined us. Yes, to answer the Yepex's point and Morgan's question, yeah, Jyoti is the chair of the CPGBML after our most recent Congress. Edward says there is a part of youth, 20 to 25, my age group, who just increasingly turn to depression, suicidal thoughts, living alone with drugs, and playing video games, having Tinder sex, and listening to shit music. Well, I mean, to a certain extent, we've all been there. I mean, other than the Tinder stuff, that was basically my youth as well. Look, this is a question of the growing up in the 90s was pretty fucking depressing, to be honest. Like when because I turned 18 in the year 2000, long time ago now, and you don't fully understand like your emotional responses when you're that age. But for me and a lot of people like I was friends with at the time, everything seemed kind of pointless. It's like you're told over and over again when you're that age, like, oh, work hard, go to university, you got to do this, that, and the other. You got to get a job. You got to advance up and up and up some corporate ladder or another. These are the beliefs that were drummed into us by our parents and by like the wider society, and it always seemed like completely pointless to me. It always seemed like you were being sold like a fucking illusion. I think what we were picking up on, though we didn't know it at the time, was that there was this pervading sense of like that this was like the end of we were at the end of something, and we didn't know why, but there is the culture that had been created by late stage British imperialism was one of nihilism, and was one of despair, and was one of cultural rot and degeneration, and the culture was of sort of rabid and hyper individualism, consumerism, and the pushing of like narcotics and alcohol to fill what you would call a sort of an ideological hole. You see, the bourgeoisie had triumphed in their ideological war in the imperialist countries against the various different forms of socialism that did exist, or social democracy that did exist, by promoting this idea of like the true fulfillment could only be found within yourself, within the individual. And this and true freedom was freedom for the individual to do whatever you desired, hence the consumerism. But of course, when buying things, small or large, didn't fill the void of belief that was left behind by the disappearance of religion, and then the disappearance and diminishing of socialism and communism, etc., and the defeat of the working class, you then get things like drugs and alcohol and pornography being promoted, especially to young people, who, when you're young, you actively seek meaning. So certainly I did when I still do to a certain extent, but I think I found a real meaning and purpose to existence much later in my life. But when I was young, you do seek meaning out, and you seek it in all kinds of places. I knew people at university who fucking joined the Scientologists because what the Scientologists and others presented was like a form of like discipline and organization that like provided a meaning for people. And that's why you see certain like younger people turning back to like religions that their parents' generation spurned and rejected. Why? It's why the Mormons still do well as well, because what do they provide? For all that they're laughable to us, but what do they provide? They provide a means of a clear means of understanding the world, a way of organizing your life that actually calls upon you to live cleanly and reject some of the most damaging symptoms of the Western way of life, and a way of living that and a philosophy that provides a kind of mental and physical order. So it's not just Mormonism; it's like all kinds of religions, if taken seriously and applied, can do that for somebody. And so again, like with the disappearance of a worldwide communist movement and the diminishing of the communist parties to being a husk and a joke, it's no surprise that people who are actually seeking meaning and discipline and order turn to various forms of religion. And it's no surprise that with this sort of massive feeling of crisis and that there is no future, and the bourgeoisie openly tells you as a young person that there is no future for you, that the future is you nose to the grindstone, working a job you hate, living in shit accommodation for most of your life, just to eke out a bare existence. And so is it any wonder that like the younger working class seeks to escape from that? It isn't a surprise. And they seek escape from it in the means that the bourgeoisie themselves provide. So drugs, drink, porn, gaming, all that other shit, all that bad shit that the bourgeoisie themselves promote, to get away from the tremendous feelings of hopelessness and negativity that the system itself generates. So I'm not surprised that the youth have fallen into this. This is what has happened. So communists, if we are to revive ourselves, need to remember some lessons from our past, which is that you do need to do such things as like promoting disciplined and orderly living. We do need to do such things as promoting living healthily. We do need to do such things as promoting hard work and discipline. We're told by the established left that like hard work, discipline, and orderly living are all like, you know, things that fascists believe in. But if you actually study the history of fascist movements, what you'll find is that fascist movements are actually ill-disciplined, chaotic, terrifically sleazy, and filled with perverts. Not too hard to find a bunch of Nazi perverts. So embracing all of that and embracing the parts of our organizational and intellectual legacy, which is focused on like continual collective improvement of our intellectual capacities, continued healthy living, regular exercise, work in a disciplined fashion, live in an orderly fashion, reject the vices that are promoted by the bourgeoisie. All these things are things that we need to do. DJ Darkside Jungle says most fascists started out as socialists. Well, Mussolini did, but most of the quite a lot of the hierarchy of the German fascists started out as ultra reactionaries and then took up the Nazi mantle. So you're wrong about that. That's just a cliche. Right. Going through the comments here. Debate about China there, which I don't have time to get into now, but I will come back to at some point. Greg has subscribed. Excellent. Good to have you here. Be sure to share the stream with everyone you know. DE says the trans thing is also the attempted erasure of women. All you need to be a woman is to change your pronouns, and DE is correct. Right. Here we go. Okay. Women hold up half the sky, says Wicked Witch. That's true. All right, going through more comments here. I'm going to have to draw things to a close because I got to go eat something soon. Right. Jerry says, you look much better than the other evening. Well, thank you very much. Maybe the lighting's better. Mystery Man says, it's not just a youth problem. Most working class males that are still single do all that shit. Yeah. It's like male depression quite frequently takes the form of like inertia. DJ Darkside says, well, it was the National Socialist Party. Right. Well, let's just, again, pop this particular myth right here. The NSDAP came from something that was called the German Workers' Party that was started in Bavaria, Munich particularly, by a group of German aristocrats in, I believe, around about 1918. The young Austrian watercolor artist, a certain Mr. Hitler, was sent in by German military intelligence to spy on them. Now, why would a group of German aristocrats form something called the German Workers' Party? It's because in 1918 in Germany, or late 1918, early 1919, the German working class and peasantry, such as it was, the German masses were moving as a whole in the direction of socialism, only to be, of course, betrayed by the social democratic leaders. So openly coming out and calling yourself the, I don't know, the German Kaiser's Party in 1918, which is what a lot of these people would have believed in, the aristocrats that founded it, was an absolute fucking no-no. If you wanted to get any workers to listen to you, which is what they needed at the time, if you wanted to have any political purchase whatsoever, you needed to at least put worker or socialist in your party title. So when Hitler and his group took over the German Workers' Party, they called it the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Why? Because, again, like socialism as a concept was still incredibly popular. And so they needed to use that as a means of actually at least getting a hearing. And Hitler, in his speeches, well, again, he would say different things to different audiences, but he always claimed, in his speeches that he was forming a uniquely German vision of socialism, which when you dive down into the details, turned out to be sort of inconsequential waffle about the shared interests of the German community, the shared interest between the German capitalists and the German workers, and it was only the evil Jewish bankers who also controlled the communists who were getting in the way of the unity of action between the German workers, landlords, capitalists all together, and that was the way you were going to have a national version of socialism. So they called themselves that to tap into the popularity that socialism had at the time, DJ. It wasn't that it was a socialist experiment that went bad. It was a cynical manipulation that by German reactionaries and German bourgeois, which was pushed further by the oratical skills of Hitler and his marketeers. Right. Bogas cybernetics would reference the discussion of depression, so that's why millions are dropping out of the labour market. That's very true. DJ Darkside Jungle says, can anyone think of one person on the left in the UK that can offer any kind of leadership? No, I can't, to be blunt, at the moment. We're in a hole, and we need to dig ourselves out of it. All right, scrolling through. Yeah, the Scientologists are bad news, but it's no wonder, given the state of things, it's no wonder people still fall prey to them. Do we need to reject alcohol and junk food? Well, some people have no alternative but to eat junk food, or like they need to eat something quickly and easily. I mean, for alcohol, I would say this. I used to be an incredibly heavy drinker. I'm not anymore. I would say that you no need to fucking chuck it all in. I mean, maybe some people have to. Maybe if you've been a particularly heavy drinker, you need to basically go cold turkey on that shit. But I can now drink in moderation. Like I can drink like a couple of glasses of wine and not have a couple of fucking bottles, which is what I used to like start off the night with. So this is something that people have got to decide, like, how are they able to limit themselves? Are you able to have like one beer and not have 10? Yeah, you have to have like a sensible fucking relationship with alcohol. And you notice now a lot of like 18-year-olds like don't drink at all because a lot of them can't afford it, and a lot of them like look at it as rather lame. So in actual fact, alcohol sales in the younger generations are going down. Greg says, I'm here because of the changes I see going on. Cost of living has become unbearable, fuel costs, etc. There must be another way. There is indeed another way, and we will aim to discover that, or make that more clear to you, I hope. Yes, and we all want a better world for the next generation. Everybody decent does. The ruling class make it as difficult as possible to find that better way. All right, just some scrolling here to the bottom. If I miss your comments, I do apologize. Right. Okay, so I'm going to draw things to a close. We've been going for 2.5 hours or so tonight. I hope I've got through as many of your questions as possible. Thanks for all 416 of you watching tonight. I will be back with you again tomorrow with an episode of the Decline and Fall Show. Tune in for that one. But until then, I'll leave you with the outro video. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Be sure to like and share this program if you haven't done so already. Take out a subscription on Patreon if you want to support the program, or do a one-off payment on Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. And now we play out with our theme.
Его утреннего стяг в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы, будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы.
Продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
С неба милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути.